Hey Internet, it is Gunter with MiniMishaps Games, and today we are celebrating 10 years of making videos. So it is crazy, but we have been 10 years since our first video that we put on YouTube. And our first video was for our first game that we made as MiniMishaps Games. It's in this big box, which I'm going to show you at the end because it's so big. But we're going to go through in this video a couple of our firsts. So our first video was the Kickstarter release video for the first game that we made, which is Teams Mayhem. And I'll be taking a unboxing and looking at that prototype at the end. But we're going to go through a couple of some of our firsts. There are going to be other firsts that you can find in other videos that aren't on this video. Those would be firsts like the first time I used an accent in a video, and the first time that I did a music parody on the channel. Lots of obscure one-offs like that. But we're going to start no particular order. The first piece that we ever 3D printed was this guy. Now, this is the Norski Ninja, and he is the 3D model version of the first logo that the MiniMishaps had. So that's a pretty old one. The 3D printer for this was purchased, I believe, in 2014. It was early in 3D printing before they did resin. So you can see the little 3D print lines there. And obviously his sword didn't get printed, didn't make it, but I kept it as our first 3D print. So that's a fun little thing. Next we have our first mold casting. Now our first mold casting, the rubber over 10 years, actually it's only like 2 years or less. It got brittle and dried out and cracked, and the mold has long been since destroyed. But I do have one of my original batches of those chests unpainted. The painted ones are all in with my D&D terrain, so I don't know necessarily which ones are originals, but there is an original poured, homemade, mold casted treasure chest. So I have the first mini that we ever painted, and it is this Tavern Patron right there. Pretty well has stood the test of my painting quality, so that's kind of fun or interesting that I have stayed right about that caliber, although I have learned more tidbits and techniques. So next we have our first kit bash. So actually one that we submitted to the Monster Bash, and I believe the second or third Monster Bash. We got to participate in that. So if you go find the Monster Bash 3 or Monster Bash 2 videos, this will be in that playlist with that group of a bunch of other YouTubers. So that was fun. Moving forward, we have got some of our digital versions. I'll put them up on the screen here, but we have our first AI picture that I could find. I don't know if it is the first ever AI picture that I did. We have got our first Lego animation or brick minifigure animation. Was just recently. It was these two guys, and it was an introduction to Grimblebip, one of our 5 team captains. Team Grimblebip does the MiniMishaps publishing. So Joffrey the Pandaren built the printer that he uses, and Grimblebip actually runs a coffee shop where the writers hang out. Next is another digital design project, our first deck of cards that we created. This was also a new one. The video for the unboxing of this was just a few weeks ago. So we did design these. The art is done with AI. The layouts are done with Adobe InDesign. And when I get to the board game here in a little bit, that was all done in Apple Pages. There wasn't even that was before we had any access to the Adobe, before we had any of that fun software, before I went to school for graphic arts. Then we have our first AI piece that won a award. So this won a top 20% in a daily challenge on Night Cafe, which is where we had our first exposure to submitting AI art to contests and challenges. We have got our first publication on DriveThruRPG, which is The Mandalorian Student. We did create this version 5e compatible, so it doesn't use any of the copyrighted names or anything from the game. It's all our own characters and homebrew, but it does use a D20 system. Last but not least, we have got our big box. I'm going to pick up the camera here because the box is so big. But here is our Teams Mayhem box. It's an old makeup box kit, I think. It had the drawers that lifted out and all that. But I'm going to pull out. We've got cards that go with it. We've got early Moldcast miniatures. Oh, here's another first we could do. These miniatures are pretty low quality, but that is because it was our first attempts at making miniatures with clay and wire armatures, and then pouring there's the first one. He's a frogagog, little frog guy. So we made the guy out of clay and wire, and then we made a mold out of silicone rubber, and then we poured the plastic pieces. So originally, we got the channel so that we could promote the board game on Kickstarter, and I did my first armature creating and mold casting so that I would be able to manufacture a prototype for the first board game. So that's fun. So we've got a couple of different early types of pieces here. Now the thing about the Teams Mayhem, that first board game that I created, it was essentially a cross between the piece movements of a chess game, but with a board that constantly changed and a deck of cards that changed the rules of play and the win conditions. And then we had the cards, Teams Mayhem background here, and then the fronts of the cards, like I said, were done before I had access to the Adobe Suite and Photoshop. So these are all created in Apple Pages, and they were printed before I took my graphic arts classes. So a lot of the images are super dark. You know, I didn't know anything about choosing fonts or anything like that. So that is the board game Teams Mayhem. And so that's super fun for me to go back and see all these firsts, and all of this is possible because of you guys, your views, your likes, and our supporters on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for 10 years of awesome nerdiness. I will see you guys in the next video, and like and subscribe if you can.